Good morning, welcome. Great to see everyone here and to worship with you this morning. And for those joining us on YouTube, we are welcome. Glad that you're here. A couple announcements before we dive into the text. We like to keep on hand Stater Brother gift cards here at the church. From time to time, there's just people we like to help out. And we've run very low. I think we might have ran out recently. So if that is something you think of, if you go to Stater Brother, or I guess any grocery store, but and just kind of think of it, and you could pick up a little gift card and just turn it in the offering, that'd be great. It's just the food pantry we used to do, it got difficult for a few reasons. And we just decided, you know what, gift cards really are helpful, and then people get exactly what they need, and it just seems like the better way to go. So if you're at a grocery store and you have a few extra bucks and you can buy a gift card, we'd love for you to bring that with you. And then the second one, we made the announcement last week, so if you weren't here and didn't watch the video last week, you didn't hear it. We're going to go after church today to the Shakey's Pizza, just to have time to hang out together. There's a new Shakey's down, I don't know how new, it's in the old Sizzler building, down off of Riverside and I think Baseline is what it is. And so anyone who does like to just show up and hang out and do that, we would love to have you. We just thought, in Acts chapter 2, it talks about the church regularly. I've been mixing words today. Should I tell them what I said earlier? This back room here has got very cluttered, and it's got a lot of crud in it. And I went to say, this room is cluttered, and I said, it's cruddered. So if you have a cluttered room that's full of crud, it is now called crudder. I'm inventing a word, so crudder. This room is full of crudder. Anyways, they met regularly together in each other's homes and fellowship and ate meals together and prayed together, studied the word together, and the Lord moved amongst them and their numbers grew. But it was the relationship that was so cool there. And we were doing a lot more stuff through the last few years of doing that, but COVID really put a damper on that, right? So we need to kind of get back to fellowshipping. So my thought was, hey, let's do this. So I'm gonna announce this one, but from week to week, if you and your family is going to lunch, just let other people know. Hey, we're going here. If anyone wants to join us, we're going here. And people can go and they cannot go. Because I know people can't afford to go every week probably, but from time to time, I think it'd just be a good thing for us to do as a church family, to build relationships, and especially if we have visitors, invite them along. It's relationship that really connects people. And so I just want to encourage you to do that and to be here, to be at Bible study. Wednesday night, we doubled, tripled our Wednesday night. That's awesome. I guess doubled probably is what would be closer to that. But we started Revelations. We got through the introduction and the first chapter this week. I'm hoping to get through chapter 2 and 3 of the letters to the churches. So if we'll see how far we can get in that. We'd love to have everyone out as we explore and learn. And just a little quick recap. What we learned last week, what we learned in that first chapter, Jesus is the King. He is our high priest. He is God. And he's in the middle of everything the church is doing. If when you read that and unpack what it's saying, that's chapter 1 in a nutshell. And I'm not going to do that every week because I want you to come and learn. I'm not going to give you the cliff notes every Sunday of what happened on Wednesday. If you have your Bibles, you can open to Mark chapter 14. And if you're online watching, I want to encourage you, you can pause this right now, watching it, and maybe set up some stuff to take communion. And we usually think about taking communion in the church and together, but we can take communion at home. We can remember God by ourselves, or with our family, or with just a couple friends or whatever. So if you're not able to be here to participate in communion at the end of this, I encourage you to participate in communion right there in your home and lead it yourself. And so you can pause that, get your stuff together, get ready, and then start the video back up. But because today we're going to be talking about the instructions of communion. And we're actually looking at Jesus and the disciples leading up to that communion. This is the last week of Jesus' life. And we've actually been in this last week for a few weeks as we've been looking at his conversations and the different people he's interacted with. In the last several weeks of us has been looking at his last week of, I'm not sure how to say that. His last week, not really, because then he before he died, because he resurrects, right? So he's still on earth after the resurrection. And so I guess it's just his last week before his death and resurrection. Not his last week of his life, because he's still alive today. He still is. Mark 14, we're getting to verse 12. We're just going to read a section at a time this morning. On the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So the disciples asked, "Where should we eat? Where should we prepare? It's time for the Passover. This is the day we need to start preparing." And as we'll see, it's not just a show up and eat type of thing. This takes time to get ready. And how many of you have hosted someone or people at your house for a meal, any meal? It takes time, prep. If you're in just the food prep alone, there's a process, there's a time. And that's the case here for the disciples. So they're starting to ask, wait, where do you want us to go? We're not sure where to go. And the reason they're asking this question is because they're on the outside of the city. And typically they wanted to have the Passover meal inside the walls, inside the city of Jerusalem. And they're on the outside. In verses 11 and 19, we're told when... I jumped ahead. Verses 13, Jesus told them to go into the city, which we haven't read that yet, but that's what we're going to see. So he tells them to go in. So that tells us that on the outside. And then we're also told that in verse 26 that they would leave the city after the Passover meal that we're going to read about and go out to the Mount of Olives. They would leave the city. So we can see through these different verses that they would go in and out of the city. They were going into the city for the day. That's the interaction that we've seen Jesus have over the last few weeks. This is where he's going to go for the Passover, but then he'd go outside. This is also why Judas is going to know where to go find him, because Jesus had this pattern of being in the city and outside of the city. And so that's why they asked the question. They're outside the city at this point, hanging out, doing everything, and he's going to go into the city. Go into the city. And they knew they needed to get in the city, but where? Wherever they were staying was outside of it. Where are we going to do this? Verses 13 and 15. So he sent two of the disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." Now, it seems like weird instructions, but it is Jesus. Go into town and you'll see a guy with a jar. And for us today, this is the same thing we talked about a little bit on Revelations on Wednesday night. Sometimes there are things that we read in the text that we just miss because we don't understand the culture. And here's something I think we miss. When he says, go into town and you find a man with a jar, we kind of go, well, how would he know which one? There'd be all these people and they're going, and the cities are busy, and there's that. One, because men didn't carry jars of water. That was women working that day. The women went to the well. Remember, we even studied that a few weeks back. The lady at the well, or the lady at the well that Jesus runs into. She's there by herself because she waited till the other ladies were gone to go. We learned. This is the thing, the women. So that would be kind of something that would stand out as, all right, this is different. This is odd. But still, even that would be. How would Jesus know that? Well, he's Jesus. We've seen all kinds of miraculous things. He could do some miraculous things. But maybe it wasn't just a miraculous thing. Maybe while they were in town, Jesus had already knew this guy and had asked him to use a room. and then said, hey, how can my disciples find you? It'll be around this time. He goes, hey, I'll go and get water. And it's some sort of sign. Maybe they had prearranged it. If you remember the last verse we read last week, Mark 14:11, they were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. So it would make sense that they would maybe do this secretly, because Judas is looking for getting paid, we found out. In John 11:57, the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so that they might arrest him. So the idea that Jesus might have talked to this guy while he was in the city at some point and made these kind of secret arrangements why they're doing it the way they are makes sense. Because there are people looking for opportunity to snatch up Jesus. And then there's another signal, self-designation teacher. The single self-designation teacher implies Jesus was well known to the owner because he told him to just call him teacher. And then there's a possessive pronoun in there, my, implies his prior arrangement to use the room. So they really believe Jesus had probably already made arrangements, and this was just their kind of, here's how you're going to find it. This is the way to go about it, and then we'll come along later. Mark 14:16. The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. Now the room was ready, the room was set, there was the furniture, there was things like that, but there's still things they needed to do. Now, first of all, I want to highlight their obedience. Okay, go find this guy, ask him this question, then follow him, and kind of like knock on the door twice, and if they knock back 3 times, it's okay. I don't know, sometimes it's happening here. But we go and find a guy. Well, let's just go find a place. We know some people. We can go find a room. We can go do. They could have just said, let's just do this on our own. But they didn't. They obeyed Jesus. But they didn't just obey him to go and find this guy in the place. They then obeyed him to prepare the meal. And now preparing the meal, as I said, it's a big task. First, they have to secure the food. And there's lots of different elements and things to that. There's different herbs and sauces and dried fruit that they have to moisten with vinegar. There's wine combined with spices, and this is used as kind of a dipping sauce for their unleavened bread that they would have to either purchase or make and get themselves somehow. They would have to purchase the wine and set out the wine and the drinks for everybody. They would have to roast the lamb. So there was quite a bit of stuff that they had to go, but they just said, all right, we'll go find this guy, and we're going to set up Passover. They were just obedience. And then verse 17. When the evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, surely not I. It is one of the 12, he replied, one who dips his bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him to have not been born. Jesus lets them know one of them was going to betray him. And he's also letting Judas know he knew what he was up to. It's kind of that contrast. We see the obedience of these disciples that go and prepare and do this work, and then we see Judas. And last week, that's what we talked about, was Judas is getting angry and getting to the point that I'm going to go figure out a way. It's all building up to his betrayal. And then in verses 22, 26, we get the instructions for taking communion. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "I tell you the truth, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to Mount Olives. So during this communion, or this Passover, Jesus gives them the instructions to what we call communion. Now, Jesus spoke of physical things, bread, wine, and his body, but the relationship between them was expressed figuratively. In that text, there's the word is, and that really means this represents. Take it, this is my body, could be take it, this is my body, this represents my body. They did not literally eat the body and drink his blood, nor do we. It represents his body. It represents his blood. It's symbolic. It's a memory. Something to remind us of what we're doing. So he did that. The Passover celebration its whole purpose was very similar to the purpose of communion. Passover was a time that the Israelites would pause each year, and they had been doing this for thousands of years, to remember when they were enslaved, to remember when Egypt was in control of them, to remember those bad days. And so they would have this Passover, and remember I mentioned they would have these herbs and these different dips. These were bitter herbs. Why is it bitter? Because it reminds you of the bitter days. But it was a time to remember what God had done when he came and he eventually rescues them. There's the 10 plagues, and that 10th plague, they are gone. And if you remember the story, they would sacrifice a lamb. And they would roast it, and they would eat it that night. And they were to eat all of it that night. And then they would take some of the blood, and they marked their door frame. And that was the sign that we are obedient to God, and we were following you. And it protected them. It saved them. It rescued them from their time of slavery and being enslaved to Egypt. And so each year, they would come and remember God's goodness. Remember the bad things and the things that God had rescued them from. It was all symbolic. And remembering that. And so Jesus comes, and he now is during the Passover meal, while him and his disciples are all remembering the bitterness and the horrible times of their ancestors and the slavery they had been. They're remembering that. He then, in that meal, takes this bread and says, "This represents me and my body. This represents me coming from heaven to earth." We sang that song today. From heaven to earth. John tells us in the beginning the Word was with God. You read Genesis, and it says, you see them, what should we do? And they realize there's not someone suitable for them. There's the idea that Jesus was there from the beginning. He's been in heaven. It wasn't that God said, "You know what? I want to save the world. I'm going to create a new being to go save the world." He said, "No, I want the being who helped create everything to go and take on a human body." So this bread represents and reminds us of that. And then the wine represents the blood that was poured out when Jesus dies on the cross and he bleeds out. All right, they put a spear in his side, and water and blood flows, and he's dead. And that is to remind us that when Jesus did those two things, and then 3 days later conquers death and rises again, it is to remind us that Jesus paid the price for us to be set free from the grips of sin, to be set free from Satan, to be given a way to go directly to heaven when our life here is done. It is to remember the price that was paid. It is to remember what God has done for us. So he makes this new covenant, this new thing, this new way, and it's through him. And so this morning we're going to conclude with taking communion together, remembering what Jesus did for us, the price he paid on that cross, so that we can be with him forever, so that we can declare we are been made righteous in his eyes. And so those that I've asked to help distribute the communion, if you can come forward, and we'll do that now.